in Germany. He's the guy that is doing the lawsuit. And there's an update on this. We don't have time. It's time for Chris's show, Your Voice, Your Call, Sunday edition. And so I'm going to bail out and get out of the way here. And in answer to your question, Chris, I can come back in a little bit. I have a couple of things I need to do to get ready for connecting the dots coming up on the other side of your show. But if I can get that taken care of, I'll come back in and hang with you for a bit.
Yeah, I like this thread that you're showing right now. I was looking at that a little bit ago. And then the one you showed, the video, I was going to see if you wanted to continue that, play another one, because those are very good videos you're putting up.
Actually, yeah, I can have number 4 ready if you want to, cover a couple of things, and then we can show lesson number 4.
Yeah, that'd be great, because today we're going to just kind of touch on stuff from yesterday and have a little fun, do a roundtable. But I like that series, so I appreciate it if you want to jump back with us.
Sure enough. All right. You'll see me working here, but I'm going to be muted.
You're good.
All righty. Have a good show there, my friend.
I appreciate it, buddy. You're going to kill that screen share.
Oh, yeah. I guess we maybe should take that down. All right. And thank you, everybody, for joining me this morning for the Sunday morning update. And I'll be back in a little bit later.
Appreciate it, Thumper. Hope you can jump in on our show. Well, hello, everybody. Yes, this is Sunday's edition, Your Voice, Your Call. A little sleepy, apologize, running around, busy day. We're going to have a little fun, touch on some stuff we mentioned last night. And in fact, Thumper even said to me, oh, no, we're not going to see any more of those weird pics, are you? Because I was touching on an interesting subject. I'll be back with you momentarily, and we will discuss what that subject is. So without further ado, and we will get started here. Well, good Sunday afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and we really appreciate it. And what I mentioned just before the intro was I have a cool video. It's actually very informative video about irrefutable proof that Michelle Obama is actually a man. Now, no, as Stumper asked last night when I touched on it, we don't see a bunch of cross pics or nothing like that. It's a couple little things about how it's more scientific than like, look at this, and it makes absolute sense. And I may bring that up. It's on YouTube, and it's a really interesting video because it approaches it in a scientific fact of men and women's body builds, how we are, or how we're made. And technically the only way she could be a she, in essence, is if she was a bodybuilder or taking steroids. And then we also saw that interesting pic that came out with them canoeing over vacation. And I don't care what you say, looking at that picture, that's a man rowing in the front of that canoe. I'm sorry. But anyhow, so I thought the video was intriguing, and it is, I wouldn't say disturbing, but very interesting in some facts of it. The whole video is about 24 minutes. We don't have to air the whole thing. I might show it here in a little bit, so maybe we'll come back to that. So last night we had a great guest on. Kay Sock's her name. She's in Oregon and does as a wife of an officer, and really intriguing conversation we had with her. And I thought about having y'all check a little bit out of that interview here shortly too, because it was really well worth it. She's very in depth with what's going on in society, and her take on the war against police, being that her husband is an officer. And I want to air a part of this interview. We'll air the beginning of it for you here momentarily while I'm setting up for the later half. This woman was really, I just got to say, smart. She does her research. And I think it would be really good for those who missed it last night to check it out. So we will air part of that here. And so I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll be setting up the next segment here momentarily. And hope you enjoy a little bit of this interview here. And here we go. Well, wait a minute there. Hold on a second. I know. I have a time to do that every single time. Thought bro should remind me of that. All right. Now we got it. I'll take it off the other page. So here it is.
Division, they had it was.
Advance it a little bit.
Yeah.
And here we go.
Mike? I think.
Yeah, we can see you really good, but you got your
the space bar too. Isn't there a shortcut like the space bar or something?
Yeah, you can also hold your space bar down while you're talking.
Christian, go down the lower left corner. There should be a microphone icon. If there is, just tap that and that should unmute.
Okay, are we good now?
Yes, hello.
Oh, I'm so
Awesome. It happens to all of us.
There for a minute.
We've all done it.
I think I have
feel bad.
sweat. Oh my God.
We've all done
right,
it. Don't
good.
feel bad. If this is your first time doing a live stream interview.
It is. Yeah, I was super excited. I actually kicked my husband and kids out of the house the next hour. I'm like, you got to go to my mom's because I can't do that.
Oh, wow. Well,
Yeah.
you have a long list of things that you are, I mean, you're really active in small businesses and all kinds of cool stuff. So tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so it's funny. My day-to-day, I've been in the same industry for 16 years, and I actually manage a team of analysts. And so my day job is very different from what I do. This I would consider truly my passion. And basically back in June, as you mentioned, I'm married to a law enforcement officer here in Portland, Oregon. And back in June, watching him come home 16 days straight being treated like absolute crap, something just clicked inside of me. And I recorded this TikTok because that was the only outlet that I knew you could really get out fast. And I recorded, it was just this really raw bit. And it went viral. And then I was able, from that one recording, I was able to connect with so many like-minded people from so many different backgrounds. And that was so addicting for me. It was encouraging, and it was something I needed more of. Just, living here in Portland, Oregon, you feel really isolated and alone. And many of my dear lifelong friends are liberals. And I started really disliking them just because I knew they were part of the problem. And I didn't want to ruin all these wonderful relationships I've built all over the years. So this has just been the best experience connecting with folks that I consider virtual friends. So it's just been wonderful.
Have any of them found out that you're doing this?
Oh, you know what's funny? I don't outwardly tell any of my friends about it, but I've been recommended via YouTube, TikTok, and on Instagram to some of my friends, and they will be like, hey, I didn't know you had this alias. And I just do that because of what I do for a living. I don't really want my employer to know how active I am concerning politics, especially being based here in Portland, Oregon. And also because of my husband's job and police officers being, especially in Portland, being targets. So I don't outwardly tell people no.
What a crazy world, that you have to be so careful. Well, that's why we go by anons. That's why,
right.
Some of us don't use our pictures. And yeah, whoever would have thought that it would be like this?
I know. I know it is pretty crazy, but so it's kind of fun. Like my friend who's a raging liberal, I would consider her a raging liberal. Her husband, pulled me off to the side. He's a conservative. I don't know how they do it because that's like a no-go for me. It always was. But he pulled me off. He's like, hey, I saw your YouTube channel. And he was all saying it all quiet. Like it was some big
wink, wink.
But yeah. So it is interesting for sure. It's fun.
Well, I want to ask you, you brought up Oregon in that area and what's like there. So what's your take on this overall country, but especially their war on police? I mean, I'm sure you worry about your husband every time he goes out.
Yeah, I do. It's interesting. I do. Going back to now that I have my ear to the ground, I like to say, and because I have so many Leos that I connect with through social media, I feel so much better about things, and we talk shop together. So that's actually been kind of a cool bonding experience for me and my hubs. But yes, no, it's very nerve-wracking. The main thing is, and especially in the beginning, right after George Floyd died while in custody, right after that, it was an absolute nightmare here. And we didn't know in Portland really what the runoff was going to be. And so they were completely understaffed, undersupported. And my husband was put in like very life-threatening, like one example, 400 of these protesters approximately. I thought it was 200. He corrected me. It was apparently right around 400 of these protesters and rioters against him and 4 police officers at one point. And yeah, and he's incredibly stoic, but he came home the next morning and was like hugging the kids. Aww. And I could tell something was different. And so he was telling me really that he was actually concerned for his life. And he's not dramatic like that. He would never say that unless it's the truth. So I do worry, not as much now because he's incredibly level-headed and he has no yearning to go out and put himself in the middle of anything unnecessarily. So he's pretty much focused on 911 calls at this point in time. He's not a cowboy. He's not out trying to make a name for himself. They still have those folks that will get themselves into hairy situations to make a name for themselves. But so with just knowing the way he is, I feel so much better. Mm-hmm. But take him out of the equation, you have, I don't know, a lot of people don't know this. The actual mayor of Portland, who we have, Ted Wheeler, the mayor is the police commissioner for the Portland Police. Oh, wow. Yeah. And that's like unheard of. So you have a mayor who is a raging liberal and spineless, and that's your police commissioner. So then the police commissioner is appointing the chief. And when the incident with George Floyd happened, there was a white woman who had been put in the position of the chief after outlaw leaping. And she was asked to step down like 3 weeks after George Floyd, and they replaced her with a Black man. So, and that's just because she didn't fit the image of what they needed after that incident. So things like that happen regularly.
Wow. I mean,
Yeah.
first of all, our salute and hats off to your husband, putting his life out there for his fellow man in your town there to protect you all.
Thank you.
We have a lot of respect for the police. I'm just like absolutely floored at that thought that just because she was white or whatever, and they put somebody else in there. I mean, I thought our mayor was bad, telling our police to stand down here in Indianapolis, but there, holy cow.
Yeah. Yeah. And to really hit it home, Ted Wheeler, he won by 2 points this last run against an Antifa mayor. She literally said, I am the Antifa mayor. And so to only lose by 2.
Now, real quick, I hope you guys picked that up. She said about their mayor winning by 2 points. So check this out.
2 points. And to openly say, I'm the Antifa mayor, and she was wearing communists on a skirt, pictures of communists on her skirt. That's how loony these people in Portland are. And thank God I'm in the suburbs, like
you
20 minutes out.
A mayor that runs it, that's part of the Antifa nonsense?
Yes. Yes. She only lost by 2 points, Sarah Iannarone. And so Ted is better than her, but not by much. But can you imagine? She was almost the police commissioner, and she's pro-communism openly.
That's crazy. And only lose by 2 points. That tells you how many people there would have voted for her.
Right.
And it tells you where you're sitting at. Have you ever thought of moving?
Yeah, I know. That's the thing, when I do these reports, I get that all the time. Why don't you move? I'm like, gosh, the thing is, okay, so my husband was NYPD when I met him. He's a New Yorker. I was on vacation there. He fell in love with this. And so I got him to move to the West Coast because I was like, oh, it's a better quality of life. Well, look at us now. But so yeah, NYPD. So he already lost tenure with NYPD for me. And now he's 12 years in, 13 years in Portland. And he's like, I don't want to do that again. But, we might have to. We have to put the kids first and the safety first over the retirement plan. So we'll see. Idaho looks mighty nice right now.
Hey, Sonny, I think her mayor is beating your governor.
Nice try, Chris. I don't think so. No, maybe.
Oh, man. Now, you hear... I wanted to share the episode because I wanted everybody to hear that in Portland, Oregon, during the race, the current mayor won by 2 points against a candidate running and openly admitting to be in communism and part of the Antifa group running for mayor in Portland, Oregon. And that person lost by 2 points. That is asinine. That should tell you what is going on in some of these big cities where they're doing this. It was crazy. We couldn't believe it last night. And you saw my reaction to know that a possibility of a Antifa and communism mayor being in the city, that's step one in infiltrating our government. I was absolutely floored at her saying that. And it just we all were like, holy cow. I mean, we were messaging a little bit in chat, a little bit like, well, this is nuts. So this tells you exactly what's going on. I mean, they already started infiltrating with some other areas in government with non-American citizens and people in other, whether it be Muslim or whatnot, has been slipping into offices here and there. But this woman who was running blatantly said it. I'm part of the Antifa. I'm into communism, war stuff to indicate this. And almost won. This should tell you out here, everybody, we need to wake up. There are these groups trying to infiltrate government agencies in high position seats to control us. And they have the fact that if that woman had won, she'd also been in Portland, Oregon. The mayor is also the head of the chief of the police, which is unheard of. And that would have caused a major, we're going to eliminate our police department. I guarantee you that was going to happen. I could not believe what they're talking about. Absolutely floored. So I wanted you to hear that and think about that for a minute, that this is why it's valuable that we're out voting and it is not disrupted or messed up at all in our elections. We can't have that. So yeah, big out there. And I was interacting with chat a little bit during that too. And yeah, I'll show that video. There's a couple people asking to see it. So why should we give you ground to the communists? Yeah, see, Shadow, that's exactly giving up any ground is exactly how that was feeling. And to find out that many people in Portland, Oregon was going to vote for that person should set the tone of what's going on across this country. I mean, that's just one location. Just imagine if it was going across the country. In what areas? I mean, this is asinine. We need to take back our country. We need to take back control, and Trump needs to stay in office. That simple. So, and I asked her near the end of the interview, would she be all right with if Trump did initiate martial law? And she said yes, because we have to take back our country. So whatever happens, happens. Pray the six does what it's supposed to. So now that because I'm being asked, we want to see it and whatnot, and I'm going to go into a couple of things, and I'll air that video. It is 24 minutes long. Maybe we'll kind of skip over here and there, and if Thumper sets up that video afterwards, we can see the part 4 of that series. That looks very interesting. So I'll bring this up, and the reason why I bring this up, I know it's been probably rehashed here and there about Michelle Obama being a man. And yeah, I still am hit up here and there, oddly enough, by people who were so adamant on who he is really she or this and that. And I've had good discussions and whatnot. Well, this dropped in my lap. And I checked it out, and it's all based on science. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll play this for a little bit. I'll pause here and there, under the copyright initials there. So I want to get your opinions and your thoughts. I'll interact with you on chat. And we may not do a whole 24 minutes, and let's see. So I want to get your thoughts on this. It's based on scientific fact of why she's a he. So here we go.
Oh, say, can you see? This video will present irrefutable and scientific proof that will establish beyond any reasonable doubt that Michelle Obama is in fact a man who prefers to present himself and who prefers to dress up as a woman. This video will prove that the person commonly referred to as the First Lady of the United States may be the first queen at best, but he most certainly is not a lady. Let's find out why. This video will examine the following. It will examine Michelle's male hands, male shoulders, male torso, male genitalia, and overall male proportions. It will also look at how a carefully designed wardrobe, a wide hairdo, a persistent facially distorting smile, and carefully selected press photos have all succeeded in suppressing the revelation.
So here we go with it.
Of Michelle's undeniable male physical form. While this information is controversial and shocking to say the least, it is being shared because it is the truth. It is being presented so that people can stop living the lie that is being dished out by the U.S. government and the mainstream media. Many people are unfamiliar with the more subtle physical differences that can be found between men and women. While Michelle Obama works very hard to distort the more obvious differences, he fails miserably at hiding them all. Let's take a close look at some of the male traits that he has failed to conceal. We will begin by looking at the hands. The scientific community has known for a long time that a man's ring finger is typically longer than the man's index finger. Here are two clear pictures that illustrate the differences in ring finger proportions on male and female hands. Notice.
Now, I'm sure many have probably seen this to a degree, but I find it intriguing because after I had it sent to me and the joke dropped in my lap, I have a buddy who studies anatomy and adamantly stands on this. So here we go.
How the man's ring finger is visibly longer than his index finger. While it is not uncommon for a woman to have the ring finger and index finger at very similar lengths, it is almost unheard of for a woman to have a visibly longer ring finger. See for yourself by looking at both of your hands. Relax your hands. Put them flat on a table. Pull the fingers together and notice the length of your ring finger. Now compare it to the length of your index finger. Your hands will now testify against Michelle Obama every time you look at them. If we look at this X-ray of a man's hands, we can see how the bone structure of
now I have to agree there, Chris. Definitely, if we could get a lock of her hair into a DNA test, that would solidify it. But much of her hair in public is a wig, and so it's fine. But I agree.
Of the ring finger is visibly longer than that of the index finger. If we look at an X-ray of a woman's hand, we can easily see that the tip of the ring finger appears to be slightly shorter than the index finger. In this photo of Barack and Michelle's right hands, even at a distance, Michelle's ring finger is noticeably longer than the index finger. In fact, the ring finger is so long that when we compare it with the one on the man next to him, it is a good photo of Michelle's hands. The ring fingers are both visibly longer than the index fingers. Once again, we have a clear view of the hands. It is undeniable. Those are the hands that emerged from the womb on a male child. Now that we have established that Michelle has the hands of a man, let's look at Michelle's shoulders. The shoulders are surrounded by bulging muscles that appear to be very masculine. Notice how the carefully tailored clothing hides the neck muscles. Let's find out why. Both the neck muscles and the bulging shoulders look like they belong on a man. In this photo, the hair and the clothing both serve to camouflage the neck muscles. Michelle's face may appear quite feminine to the undiscerning eye, but after taking a closer look, isn't it amazing what the very best makeup artists and hairstylists can do to any person?
Now, I bring this up because of a conversation I had the other day with a friend who was pretty adamant that they weren't sure if she was he or he was this or whatever, but it's just kind of intriguing to know that this kind of thing, it does make you question, it does make you wonder. We'll go just a little bit longer, and then I'll drop a link for y'all to actually physically see this video for those who are asking to see it.
Who has enough money? And to help add to the illusion, Michelle often slouches forward. This is done to make the shoulders appear smaller, but the masculine shoulders remain. Wild hair and dangling earrings can pull the eye away from the shoulders, but once you have spotted them, they just don't seem to go away. To make matters worse, men have more prominent brow features than women. As you can see, Michelle's eyebrows are generally painted on in such a way that they wrap around the male skull bone that protrudes out at the eyebrows. Close-up images of the eyebrows reveal a tremendous effort at wrapping the paint all the way around this very prominent male facial feature. Once again, the painted eyebrows do not match the size of the brow bone. Now, what most people...
Now, it goes on in pretty good detail as well. And in chat there, I always wondered why did they, portray this? Why make he or her, if that's what she wanted to be, was a female, that's fine. My thought was I can accept it. I think most American people could have accepted it, but maybe it's because of the image of having a first lady in office. That's why they made him her, made sure. That's the only conclusion I come up with is, well, we got to keep that illusion. But like everything else in the 8 years of that presidency, it was all a farce and a lie. So it kind of makes you wonder, overall, why lie?
People do not know about human anatomy is that the body is naturally proportioned based on the ratio between overall body height and the size of a person's head. In this illustration, you can see how perfectly proportioned a typical human body of each gender is. This illustration also reveals a description of how the shoulders are measured. On a woman's body, the shoulder width is typically equivalent of 2.5 times the width of her head. Here we have an example of a healthy woman. As you can clearly see, her shoulders are about 2.5 times the width of her head. A man's shoulders are typically the equivalent of 3 times the width of his head. In this illustration, it is easy to see that this person is in fact a man based on the width of his shoulders in relation to the width of his head. And here we have an image of an extremely athletic man whose gender is confirmed by the width of his shoulders in relation to the width of his head. Now, if we take an objective look at Michelle, we see that the shoulder width is not compatible with the shoulders of a woman in relation to the size of the head. The dress, the pearls, the fancy hairdo, and makeup can redirect the observer's attention away from the proportions, but all the illusions cannot make the physical reality that Michelle is a man go away. Now let's take a closer look at Michelle's body proportions. Notice in this illustration that the height of a typical healthy man is roughly 8 times the height of his head. The height of a typical healthy woman is roughly 7 times the height of her head. This illustration reveals that Michelle stands at 8 heads tall. At this point in human history, there is no amount of surgery that can change his body proportions. His overall height is exactly 8 times the height of his head, proving that Michelle cannot possibly be a woman. The jacket was carefully chosen to diminish the manly appearance of the shoulders. Notice how there is a wide gap at the waist to create an optical illusion that the hips are wider than the shoulders.
Are we catching on yet?
Michelle is also wearing flat shoes. He does not tend to wear high heels because if he did, while standing at 5 feet 11 inches tall, he would tower over almost all of the women as well as most of the men who are standing nearby. Here we can see Michelle standing next to a woman. Notice how the woman's shoulders on the far left are no match for Michelle's man shoulders. There are many tricks of the eye going on in those dresses. Someone has added a few pounds of necklaces to downplay the bulging shoulder muscles. It is easy to see how Michelle arches his shoulders forward to help with the illusion just a little bit more. This illustration reveals how the hip and shoulder proportions are naturally different between men and women. While men's hips are smaller than their shoulders, a woman's proportions tend to be the opposite. I'm not able to show you an image of Michelle at the beach. However, when Serena Williams appears on a beach walking next to an actual woman, it is quite easy to see the physical differences between the body structure of a man and a woman. Even when a man has breasts that are formed by hormone replacement therapy, the hip bones remain much narrower than the shoulders. It is interesting to note that Serena's thin upper body and heavier lower torso are almost identical to Michelle's. So how then is it possible for Michelle to pose next to a man and appear to have female body proportions? Simply by turning the shoulders away from the camera, the shoulders appear to be narrower. Notice the difference when the shoulders are square to the camera. In this photo, we can see Michelle turning the shoulders away from the camera, and then simply by bending the wrist while relaxing the biceps, the upper arms appear to be more feminine.
Now, y'all can try that. I'll admit, I did. And I being a guy, and you can distort the look a little bit by turning your wrist. It's a way to fool the eye.
But look at what happens when the shoulders are square to the camera and the man arms are plain to see. The wild hair and stacked up jewelry can only do so much to distract you from the uncomfortable truth. The biceps are fully flexed because they are now carefully concealed under a custom-tailored jacket with exaggerated shoulder pads that make the arms appear smaller. It is quite an effective illusion. But when Michelle is put next to a real woman, the male features simply jump out of the photo. In order to trick the eye into perceiving the illusion of wider hips, Michelle typically wears dresses that are tight above the upper waist, but then flare out at the hips. In this image, we can see why Michelle will most likely avoid a simple V-neck in the future. A square front view reveals the broad shoulders and the neck muscles, but the super wide hairstyle creates the illusion of smaller shoulders, and the stacked up jewelry steers the eye away from those massive neck muscles. But in this image, there is a convincing first impression that these two people are both women. And so how do they present the illusion that they are both female? It is really quite simple. The woman wears a loose shirt and tight pants, while Michelle wears a tight shirt and loose pants. Add a few feminine externals, and there you have your illusion. In this image, it is quite easy to see just how large Michelle's shoulders and neck muscles are, especially when compared with the ones Barack has hidden under his suit jacket with the padded and extended shoulders. The bulging muscles under the big hair were perhaps the inspiration for this image that has been circulating on the web. So apparently, I'm not the only person who knows that Michelle is a man, and a very strong man at that, I might add. You will not find many pictures like this one because when Michelle frowns, the fact that he is a man frowning becomes very plain to see. And when Michelle drops the charade, the feminine false externals drop like a lead balloon.
That evil look.
My, what a very feminine and slender neck you have. I wish I had one like that.
Is that an evil look or what?
The manly features often stand out like a sore thumb when the guard is let down and the photo is unexpected. Let's not forget the Adam's apple. What most people don't know is that the appearance of the Adam's apple can be diminished through surgery, but it cannot be fully removed. In this image, you can clearly see Michelle's Adam's apple. Once again, Michelle's Adam's apple is not too difficult to spot. The Adam's apple stands out in this earlier photo as well. Notice the bulging neck muscles and heavy man brows, even on the wedding day. Speaking of the wedding day, you must be wondering what happened to Michelle's male genitalia. There are certain undergarments that some people wear in order to hide their male genitalia. It is similar to a sports cup that men wear while playing contact sports. In this photo, you can see a surprising bulge that appears to be Michelle's special cup. This wardrobe malfunction was revealed by the wind that was blowing against him, revealing the contour of his form. But that's not the only wardrobe malfunction. In this picture, the lighting cast the most unfeminine shadows on Michelle's manhood. This photo begs the question, how could the audience not notice? In this earlier wedding photo, Michelle's body proportions are a close match to Barack's. Years of hormone replacement therapy may provide a touch of extra fat in certain areas, or a more feminine-looking skin tone, or change the voice a bit, but there is no amount of hormones or feminine gestures that will change the skeletal proportions of a man. Michelle's body structure cannot possibly be that of a woman.
Now, in some of these photos, like that one, it's coming off of Air Force One or whatever. I mean, I don't care if you're representing to be First Lady of our great country. Shouldn't you look like a First Lady more so? I mean, I don't know. Just my thought.
Even Barack's heavily padded shoulders and the silhouette of a feminine mirror cannot hide the fact that Michelle's shoulders are those of a man. Poofy dresses and big hair help to maintain the illusion of being a woman, but there are some things that simply cannot be hidden, like that protruding man finger. However, in this image, Michelle's man
People in the chat seem to be agreeing with it, that it seems to be one of those, possibilities of what it is, and I have to agree with it. It is called irrefutable proof that Michelle is a man. So check it out. You can go to our Your Voice, Your Call links on YouTube and all over and see it for yourself. So you'll catch it out and whatnot. And I got to say, I'm kind of, I don't know, surprised at that. And I had people in chat was trying to mute and say something with them. So, hold on here. Now, those of you who were with us last night, I don't know if you noticed or saw, we had a couple really, I put this up. I really like this little video. And this was a lot of fun. Everybody got a kick out of this. And so I will show this one because this is our president. We see ourselves stuff often, and this is a good one. And just out of some fun here, let's check it out. That I love that movie, but that is great that they do those things. And I have to say, our president is wonderful, and what he's doing is awesome. And I want to apologize because it muted for a moment, and I know why. So hopefully it's not muted now. I apologize. So last night I also brought up an interesting thing came from MSN Fact Check, and this is going to make you think for a moment, and I'll bring a couple of these thoughts here. Donald Trump got 74 million votes. There's approximately 133 million registered voters in the U.S. That would leave 59 million votes left for Pedal Joe. And we all know how he got 81 million, but the numbers don't match up. And yes, this can be researched. This is roughly accurate between all the genuine registered voters. It's a given and obvious of what they're doing. And it is frustrating to see that people are falling for this crap. I can't get it. I don't understand how it's so possible for America to fall for it. I don't know. We're doctrine. Are they? It's like slow rolling us into believing their nonsense. I don't know how they think they can keep getting away with it. It is astronomical, and I just so I'm going to put this out there, and I said it last night. If one death in 10,000 cases is enough to shut down our country, then shouldn't one fraudulent vote in 10,000 be enough to shut the election? Yeah. So this whole thing's been perpetrated to take over our country, and it's disgusting, and I absolutely am livid at this, and we cannot keep having this. So I hope people wake up and start realizing that that's their game plan. That's their goal, is to do what they can to take over our country. And this article I really, really like. She's my new hero of the week, and I believe everybody's probably looked at this from Newsmax. This wonderful young lady, and we all know who she is. Boebert will object to the Electoral College certification. She's an open carry advocate and is going to reject and object to the certification. So newly elected Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado said she will object to Electoral College results certification on January 6th. That is the day that the Electoral College results will be counted officially in a joint session of Congress, guided by the U.S. Constitution and my responsibility to my constituents. I will object to Electoral College results on January 6th, she wrote in a Twitter post Thursday. After being accused on Twitter of taking stance solely to make news and further her career, she replied, "Newsflash, I'm not here to make a career for myself. I'm here to save our country from socialists." Praise be God that she has the fortitude and the strength and no pun intended, the balls to stand up against this crooked election. I wish they all would be like this. Earlier this month, Boebert told the Epoch Times that she supported the president's legal efforts to overturn the 2020 election. This is a contested election, and I believe that President Trump should fight with everything that he has and use all of the authority that he has as the president of the United States to make sure that we have a free and fair election. We need to be looking into these allegations. We need to be taking them seriously. Boebert has been a huge supporter of the Second Amendment rights and has said she'll fight efforts by House Democrats to ban lawmakers from carrying guns at the Capitol. The Democrats are always up for stripping away our constitutional rights and feel threatened when we simply want to exercise those rights, she told Fox News. I carry a firearm to protect myself and want to exercise my right to do so in one of the most dangerous cities in America. They want to take that away from me. I look forward to helping make sure that they can't. I give her kudos, and my producer and also Indie News last night, he has had her on his show, and they've discussed a lot. And I praise to her. I give her so much. I just wish they all had the strength, the will to do that for us, and she does. So she deserves that admiration and respect. I think we can all owe her a praise. So send her wonderful warm letters and wishes telling her, yes, enough's enough. Here in chat, Free Spirit, plus there is never 100% turnout rate to vote. It's been said 66.2% went out to vote this time. Yes, you are right, because we aired that 2 weeks ago on a Saturday night episode. We showed the average is 63 to 67% turnout, including when Obama ran, and so on. And it went back even early history, early 1900s when it started, and showing proof that that is about the average of the population. So, yeah, and believe it. You know, we all know it was rigged, and now they just put out the 270-page report proving it. So let's hope that somebody reads that and says, you know what? Yeah, enough's enough. I have to agree. And you know, we've seen this, and I'm kind of just touching on stuff tonight, touching on subjects. I want to hear your thoughts and responses. And right here, you know, when Pedal Joe was running in 87, 88, he had to drop out because of lying and plagiarism. And in fact, many times he tried to say, oh, no, I never plagiarized, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, whatever. Yeah, right in your face. And in fact, he's trying to put a stop to that video as last I heard about that. He's done more than plagiarize. I'm sorry. So pulling that up and the facts why they are so adamant to go against our wonderful president. This is straightforward. This is exactly what the deal is. Why is our president Trump so hated? The Washington elites hate Trump, and the Democrats and media constantly lie about and libel Trump. There were fake probes in impeachment, fake in riots. Why is he so different? Presidents have, assaulted women in office, Clinton, allowed terrorists to attack American cities, Bush, started multiple pointless wars, Obama, and so on and so on. Why is only Trump singled out to be attacked? Here's why. He's shutting down human trafficking. Trump is stopping the endless wars. We have not had one war since he's been in office. Trump is exposing Washington's corruption. He's also ended the federal banking scam. Yes, he has. It was in chat earlier, and I hinted at that and made it clear, the Sarah law. These four things, trafficking slaves and drugs, war, corruption, the Federal Reserve scam, are how the deep state and globalists fund, mind you, themselves. And the deep state also uses trafficking, underage sex to set up the blackmail CEOs and politicians. Yeah, the deep state is at war with Trump. As he fights to free America, the deep state is fighting to survive. It's a war, and the deep state controls Antifa, BLM, and most mainstream media. After the election, there may be riots. The media may say it's undecided or claim that Trump lost. Don't be fooled. The rioters are controlled, and the media lies. Be patient and learn the truth. I have to agree on that 100%. And that's why we're in a war, everybody. And we have to stand up for our president. We have to stand up for truth, justice, and big time the American way. Stand up and fight against this nonsense. I aired a part of that interview last night for you to understand partly what's going on, especially in that area of Washington, where she tells us that the race was ran for the mayor with someone who openly admitted they're part of Antifa. It's crazy.
By the way, I'm back.
Hello, Thumper. I see you're back. I appreciate it. So what we're going to do, because he started a really good video series and I like it. And I'm going to ask Thumper to play, if everybody doesn't mind, which I'm sure they don't, Thumper, we love it. A continued piece of that video, about an hour long. If he starts it here, we won't do a song at the top. We'll play this video. I like this series. And if it helps him and we keep getting the message out, I'm all for it. Thumper, what do you think?
It's an excellent series, and it's very, 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 very educational, especially when you look at what's going on in our country right now.
Yes, and I'm going to have him play this. And while he's doing that, I'm going to interact with you on chats. And real quick, American people, don't think anymore. That's why they Google. You know what? You might be right. I mean, it's time to think. What do you think, Robert? It's time to think. It's time to stand up.
Time to think. It's time to stand up. And as you go through these videos, you can start to put the pieces together of what's been going on in our country and what President Trump appears to he's doing in order to, put things back on the right track, especially if you've been following this channel and the Q posts and all of the information that's been put out over the past 3 years.
So hang on to your seatbelts. Go ahead, Thumper, when you're ready, sir. And check this out.
Here we go, guys. This is lecture number 4, the Constitutional War Powers and the Enemy Within. This is a video that was produced by the John Birch Society in a series of videos, and this is lecture number 4. Take notes. There will be a test at the end.
Enjoy.
Welcome to lecture number 4, Constitutional War Powers and the Enemy Within. I find this one's a particularly interesting one to me. When I was, years ago, first studying the Constitution, as I began to get to know the Constitution more in depth, I found that there were some of my political views that I held very strongly that I found were in conflict with the Constitution. And this was a great time of introspection for myself to weigh my own views and see why I believed them and how they compared with the views of the Founding Fathers. And in the end, I concluded the Founding Fathers were right and I was wrong. In fact, I want to go to this slide for just a moment. The American flag here, I want to symbolize for a moment the Pledge of Allegiance, because I believe the Pledge of Allegiance really gives us some guide into a proper attitude when we're studying the Constitution and find our views might be a little in conflict with it, that when we pledge our allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands, when we're pledging our allegiance to the republic, the first question I ask is, what republic? And the answer that I come up with is the republic that is defined by two things. It's built on the foundation of the Declaration of Independence and the principles in there. And then the structure built on that foundation is the U.S. Constitution, which defines our republic, those two documents. And so when I pledge my allegiance to the republic, I'm literally pledging my allegiance to those principles within the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. And if that's where my allegiance is, then my allegiance is not to any political party or to any political candidate or any media talk show host or other media pundit. My allegiance is first to the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. In fact, even though I'm employed by the John Birch Society, my allegiance is not to the John Birch Society. I came to them because of their adherence to those principles, not the other way around. They didn't guide me to the Constitution. I first fell in love with the principles of the Constitution, and then I've sought to work with any groups and organizations who will help reinstate the Constitution and the principles of liberty. And so if any of the groups or individuals that I've supported ever deviate from that, if I really mean my oath, pledging my allegiance to the Constitution, then I'm sticking with the Constitution. With that in mind, there's a great speech that many of you are probably familiar with by Patrick Henry, the conclusion of which you may remember, "Give me liberty or give me death." He gives us a great viewpoint, a great attitude towards this as well, where he says, "We are apt to shut our eyes against a painful truth and listen to the song of that siren until she transforms us into beasts." When something's uncomfortable, painful truth, we often don't want to know. Oftentimes people would rather, don't tell me, I don't really want to know. But then he challenges that viewpoint. Is this the part of wise men engaged in a great and arduous struggle for liberty? And then he gives his attitude, which is just the opposite. He says, "For my part, whatever anguish of spirit it may cost, I am willing to know the whole truth, to know the worst, and to provide for it." And that's certainly a far more wise position to be taking. Go ahead, I do need to know the truth, no matter how painful it is, because we must provide for it. We must prepare for it. In the case of fighting for liberty, it's important that we understand the principles of liberty, that we can defend them, and that we can recognize those who are hostile to those principles of liberty. I found personally that some people that I had voted for and supported, as I got to understand the Constitution better, I recognized that they are not supporting the Constitution. And I kind of had to repent of some of the votes I'd made, supporting people that don't support these principles. And so by knowing the truth, it has helped me be able to provide for that knowledge, to be able to prepare and to defend liberty better. So with that basis, I want to talk about some of these principles that we're pledging our allegiance to, starting with the Declaration of Independence. You're probably familiar with the second paragraph where it says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Now the next one, the next line, which is a little less commonly known, gives us a definition for the purpose of government. And I recommend when you're interviewing someone that's running for office, ask them that question. In your view, what do you feel is the purpose of government? Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence gave us a great definition. He said that to secure these rights, these God-given unalienable rights, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. The purpose of government is to protect or to secure our God-given unalienable rights. Two questions. First of all, why are these unalienable rights? It's because of where they came from. These rights don't come from government, they come from God. And if they come from God, no earthly man or organization, no government has the authority to take these rights from us. Now, the next question is then, if government is engaged in anything besides that, are they really fulfilling their proper role of the government? If government's doing something other than protecting our rights, they're probably doing something they should not be. And that's probably the simplest test I've ever heard for what is really constitutional and what is not. Is it, when it comes down to it, protecting our God-given unalienable rights, or is it doing something else? Now with that, I want to compare these core principles to the principles that the Charter of the United Nations is founded on. Now first of all, this started off with a recognition that there is a God, and that God is the grantor of our rights. Now, the Charter of the United Nations never mentions God. And when you take God out of this picture, what happens to our unalienable rights? If they don't come from God, well, they must come from government. And if they come from government, then government can take them away. And so by removing those things, these unalienable rights now become conditional rights. And the limited purpose of government now becomes unlimited. And that's exactly the philosophy that the United Nations is built upon. In fact, they have this wonderful charter called the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which talks all about how important your rights are. Except there's this little clause in there that really destroys the whole meaning. It says, rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Think about what that's saying. Your rights cannot be exercised in any way that's contrary to our agenda. In other words, you can have your rights as long as they don't get in our way. How does that compare to unalienable? Well, it's just the opposite, isn't it? That's directly contrary to the principles that our nation was founded on in the Declaration of Independence, of having unalienable rights, and then the Constitution written to protect those unalienable rights. What this means to me is that this United Nations concept is incompatible with the principles our nation was founded upon, this republic we're pledging our allegiance to. And either we must end our membership with the United Nations, or we must give up the principles our nation was founded on. They cannot coexist for long. So next, 4 key principles. The first one actually comes from the next part of the Declaration of Independence, the very next line, the concept of delegated powers. After it says the purpose of government was to protect those God-given rights, it says then deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Who are the governed? We the people. We consent to government having certain power. Where did we give our consent to the federal government having power? Well, it's the Constitution. And again, as we've said before, if it's not on the list of delegated powers, then they don't have that power. The next concept, enumeration of powers. That's that list. There's the specific list of powers they were given. James Madison refers to this concept in Federalist number 41, where he says, for what purpose could the enumeration of particular powers be inserted if these and all others were meant to be included in the preceding general power? We didn't mean to give Congress unlimited power. We gave them specific enumeration of powers. Why did we bother enumerating them if they can do anything they want? Couple that with what Alexander Hamilton says later in the Federalist Papers. He says that this enumeration of powers would be absurd as well as useless if they could do whatever they wanted, if we had unlimited government. Third principle here is the separation of powers. Now, this is one thing I do remember learning in grade school, and that is that we have 3 branches of government. An executive branch, which is the president and his departments. We have the legislative branch, U.S. Congress, the House and Senate. And then we have the judicial branch, the Supreme Court and the lesser courts. And certain powers are given to each that cannot be shared or crossed between them. There are certain powers, like the power to legislate. Remember before, we talked about in Lecture 2, all legislative powers herein granted are vested in Congress, which means that the power to legislate, the power to write law, is only in Congress, and that the president has no real constitutional power to write law, although he does it all the time. And I'm not speaking of any specific president. Every president in my lifetime has done so. But at the same time, there's no legislative power in the judiciary, and yet our Supreme Court creates new laws frequently. Clearly against this third principle, separation of powers. We'll cover some more concepts of separation of powers later today. The last one is the division of powers. This is that some of these powers are reserved to the people. The 10th Amendment covers that concept, that some powers are to the federal, some are to the state, and some are to the people. And so the question I ask is, whose jurisdiction is this concept? For example, the management of wolves, wildlife. Clearly, there's nowhere in the Constitution that there was an enumerated power for the federal government to control the wildlife within the states. So it's not in their jurisdiction. It could be in the states, it could be in the people, but that's up to we the people. If we delegate that power to our state, then the state might manage the wildlife, might manage the wolves. But in another state, the people could choose to not delegate it to the states, but maybe to their county, and on a county-by-county basis, they manage their wolves or other wildlife. It's a matter of jurisdiction, but clearly by the Constitution we know that it's not federal. It has nothing to do with their jurisdiction. So those are the four key principles that really are very foundational in understanding what it is we're pledging our allegiance to. I always refer to the Pledge of Allegiance as a citizen's oath of office. It's very similar to when an elected official raises their hand to the square and swears an oath of office to uphold the Constitution. Literally, when we the people pledge our allegiance to the flag and to the republic, we're doing the same thing. So, the topic at hand today, talking about constitutional war powers. First, I want to introduce you to just a few statements from the Founding Fathers that give us a feel for what was their concerns, what was on their mind as they were drafting the Constitution. Here, John Adams gives us a very concise statement. Great is the guilt of an unnecessary war. You'll see that they took great pains to make sure that our nation would not too easily go to war, that we'd only go to war when we really intended to, really needed to. Because if our nation goes to war too easily, it costs the lives and fortune of our nation and that of others when it's unnecessary to do so. Another one, this one from James Madison, he says, the means of defense against foreign danger historically have become the instruments of tyranny at home. They were very leery of having a powerful military force in the hands of this central government, the federal government as we call it. They had just been through King George using their military. Remember, they were all British citizens, so the Redcoats were our standing army. And we had just gone through our own standing army being used against our own people to enforce tyranny of King George. And so they're very leery of creating that same kind of power and giving it to the president. In fact, in the Federalist Papers, James Madison goes through this in great detail, somewhere around 25 through 29, Federalist numbers 25 through 29. He examines this problem of how do you, on the one hand, have enough military power ready to go to defend your nation against a foreign invasion at a moment's notice. And on the other hand, you don't have this powerful military at the beck and call of the president to use to enforce tyranny. It was quite a problem that they debated extensively. It's a little late. If you don't have a standing army, it's a little late to start recruiting when someone's already invading your territory. You better have them trained and ready to go. And so the solutions they came up with, I find are just brilliant, absolutely inspired. Alexander Hamilton goes on to explain some of their concerns as well. Federalist number 8. He says, safety from external danger is the most powerful director of national conduct. The violent destruction of life and property incident to war will compel nations, the most attached to liberty, to resort for repose and security to institutions which have a tendency to destroy their civil and political rights. And then his conclusion kind of sums it up. He says, to be more safe, they run the risk of being less free. So again, if we have too powerful of a military force in order to be as safe as possible, we risk going right back to where we were, with King George having that military power to enforce his tyranny. So you see the concerns they have. Now let me demonstrate to you the incredible solutions they came up with. As we turn into the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, you may recall, can be separated into two categories. The enumerated powers in Section 8, and in this version, that'd be on page 17. The first portion of Article 1, Section 8 are the general welfare powers. And then as we get to Clause 10, which says to define and punish piracies, that's where we start into the common defense powers. Clauses 10 through 16. So we'll be going through most of those. We'll actually start with 11, right at the bottom of the page 17, where Congress has the power to declare war. I think that's pretty clear, isn't it? If it says here, Article 1, Section 8, the Congress shall have power to, and then you jump down to Clause 11, to declare war. Who can declare war? Congress. There's not really any gray area here, is there? When was the last time that Congress declared war? Well, that was World War II. Have we been involved in any wars since then? Quite a few. And yet Congress hasn't declared war once since then. How did we get into war without Congress ever declaring war? Well, it's been by circumventing the Constitution. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail here in a moment. So clearly, though, the power to declare war was given to Congress and not to the president. Since then, it's been the president taking us into war, generally referencing United Nations resolutions that he's enforcing. Looking to the United Nations for his authority. Well, the United Nations doesn't give our president authority over the Constitution. He must abide by the Constitution. That's where his oath is. James Madison, explaining this concept that war-making powers must be held in Congress and not the president, he says he felt that in no part of the Constitution is more wisdom to be found than in the clause which confides the question of war or peace to the legislature and not to the executive department, not to the president. In fact, Abraham Lincoln summed this up very well as he was explaining his understanding of why in the Constitutional Convention of 1787 they gave this power to Congress and not to the president. He's responding here to a letter where someone felt really the president should have the power to declare war, and he's rebuking them. He says, the provision of the Constitution giving the war-making power to Congress was dictated, as I understand it, by the following reasons. Kings had always been involving and impoverishing their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object. Then he goes on, this our convention understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions. Wow, that's quite an indictment. He goes on, they resolved to so frame the Constitution that no one man should hold the power of bringing this oppression upon us. But your view, he's referring back to this man that thought presidents should declare war, your view destroys the whole matter and places our president where kings have always stood. Our president is no king. And they clearly understood the tyranny. They personally had experienced the tyranny of a king having the power to declare war and execute the war. That is how King George was able to do it. They wanted to separate those powers. So clearly, power to declare war must be in the hands of Congress to deliberate, to argue back and forth whether or not it's in the best interest of our nation. Now, as we continue on to the next page here, Clause 12, top of page 18, it says Congress has the power to raise and support armies. But notice what it says next. No appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. Congress can only appropriate money for this army for up to 2 years, no longer than. They could appropriate it for 2 months or however long they want, up to 2 years. Why did they choose 2 years, by the way? Congress is a 2-year session, and they can only fund up until the next Congress convenes. And then the next Congress can vote whether or not we want to continue funding our standing army. This is clearly intended to make the army a temporary structure, that they raise the army. This isn't a maintain. Notice what it says in the next clause. Congress is to provide and maintain a navy. Very different from the way they're treating an army. The Navy is supposed to be an ongoing, maintained military force. There's no limit to the appropriation of money because we wanted to always have a Navy, whereas the Army was supposed to be temporary. And why would that be? Well, again, going back to their primary concern, a Navy is very difficult to use against your own people to enforce your tyranny. And yet a standing army is very powerful at doing such a thing. They also knew that to raise a Navy takes a great deal of time. They wanted to build up their Navy and have it as a defense, because a Navy is primarily defensive, whereas the Army could be used against your people. So now we have the problem, how do you have a powerful military to defend your nation against invasions? Because again, if it's a land invasion, our Navy isn't going to help a whole lot. How do we do that? How do we have a powerful resistance against invasion and yet not have a standing army in the hands of the king, or president in this case, that could be used against us? And the solution they came up with, I found, was brilliant. The next part is they have the power to call forth the militia. That was to be our first line of defense. If we don't at that time have a standing army ready to defend the nation, the militia of each state was supposed to be trained on a regular basis. In fact, as we go on to the next part, it talks about that training, but ready to be called forth by the Congress. The next portion, it actually says, the next clause, to make rules for governing regulation of land and naval forces. Then the next one, to call forth the militia. Notice what it says for. Congress has the power to call forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. That's our first line of defense when a land invasion happens. And then the next clause, clause 16, says that Congress has the power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, those that they have called forth. But reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So we'll break this down for a moment. Congress has the power to organize, arm. It's actually their duty to organize, arm, and discipline the militia. But the states appoint the officers and actually execute the training. The militia is generally in the hands of the states, except when called forth by Congress. Now this is an interesting power. Congress, first of all, setting the rules of training, you could call it, the disciplining, organizing, arming, and disciplining. And then at the end it says, according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. So Congress sets the standards of training for this militia, so that when they call forth the militia from Montana and Arizona and everywhere else, that we're trained to the same standards. And that we don't have 50 different calibers of rifles that we're all using, and they have to figure out, okay, these are the calibers that Arizona needs, and this is the caliber for... It becomes very complex when you have many different states pulled together into one fighting force. And so they set a standard for their training and their arming and so on, so they could easily come together as one, as a defensive force. But for the most part, the power over the militia is in the hands of the states, except when called forth. And by nature of that fact, throughout our history, there have been many times when Congress has called forth the militia, and the state has said, no, we don't feel this is a valid use of our militia. We feel you're abusing your power, and we're not sending our militia. That became a check against abuse, didn't it? That Congress would have to raise an army. They don't always have one. And if they want to call forth the militia, there is someone that could intervene there. Very interesting. The power is there, but it's also has some checks against its abuse. Now, the next thing I want to go into is this militia. If you talk to the average person on the street about a militia, they'll think of what they've seen in the news media, of some rogue group up somewhere out in the countryside that got out of control. They got caught making plans for overthrowing our government or whatever else. That's not a militia. They may call themselves a militia, but that's not a true constitutional militia. A true constitutional militia is under the jurisdiction of the Congress and the state in which they reside. They answer to the two of those and are organized by them. In fact, the other answer that I often hear is, well, isn't the militia the same thing as our National Guard? And no, that's not really the case either. Let me demonstrate for you. First of all, I want to point to the Second Amendment. And those that are big gun rights advocates generally focus on the second half of the Second Amendment, that the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But we miss the importance of the first half of it. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. That's why the people must be able to have the right to bear arms. A well-regulated militia is necessary to our security. Interesting. Let me demonstrate why that is so. By comparing a National Guard to a true constitutional militia, there are many things we could compare. I'll just choose three. First of all, who is the National Guard? Well, it consists of those who choose to volunteer, to enlist. Constitutional militia historically was everyone. Everyone was required to be in their state militia. Every able-bodied man between the ages of, and then it varied from state to state what the age range was, might be 16 to 65 or whatever. Today, with men and women still serving in military purposes, it would be every person, perhaps. Every person between the ages of, 15 or 16, maybe up to 55 or 65, something like that. Every able-bodied, meaning that if someone was deemed that they didn't have the physical capacity to participate, they would be given a waiver. But otherwise, it was your duty to serve. And you could be fined for not showing up to your militia training meetings of the month. And in fact, the next one here, where are the arms stored? This is another interesting difference. When you do your service with the National Guard and then it's time to go home again, do you bring your guns home? Do you bring the tanks home? Park them in your driveway? No. They're stored by the government, aren't they? You leave them at the armory. Government keeps the control of those weapons. Whereas in the constitutional militia, you were required to keep your guns in your home, ready to go at a moment's notice. In fact, they would do inspections. That they would go around home to home and make sure that you had a certain amount of ammunition and powder ready to go in a satchel where you could grab your gun, grab the satchel, and you're out the door. And if you were found unprepared, you could be fined, that you're not armed and ready to go. Very interesting. So here we have the arms stored in the homes, that military power then being with the people. And then the last one here, can they be deployed abroad? Now remember, back a few clauses here, this would be in clause 15, it said that Congress has the power to call forth the militia for three purposes. That was to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. Which one of those has to do with being deployed to Iraq? None of them. The constitutional militia cannot be called forth into foreign service. For that purpose, they would have to raise an army. And so, clearly we are deploying our National Guard abroad, so the answer to that would be yes, they can. And the constitutional militia cannot be engaged in foreign conflicts. They are a defensive force only. Now, of course, when we do raise the army, who do you raise it from? You do raise it from the general body of the people. So those that were serving in the militia could then enlist as part of the army. They'd be the same people. But the actual structure of the militia cannot be called forth abroad. Very different. Now, I want to emphasize a point here with a quote from, I don't too often quote the enemies, but Mao Zedong does give us a very good pointer here, and that is, he says, political power comes from the barrel of a gun. In this first structure, National Guard, who holds that barrel of the gun? Who controls it? Those arms are stored by the government. They're in the control of the government. In a constitutional militia, this barrel of the gun power is in the people, isn't it? That's probably the most stark difference between a constitutional militia and a National Guard. The political power of the barrel of the gun is in the people here. And if you're in a country where every person is required to be armed and trained on a regular basis with their arms, it would be foolish to invade such a country. Very much. And so you can see why that is the first line of the Second Amendment. The security of a free state is dependent upon having a well-regulated militia. It's very clear why that is now. So going back to prior to 1913, to understand how the war powers all fit together. Because certain things were changed in 1913, it changes the way our war powers work. And then we'll give you a big picture of how it all works together. So first of all, prior to the 16th and 17th Amendments and prior to the Federal Reserve, here's how our system used to work. That first of all, the people here would directly elect our U.S. congressmen, House of Representatives. And then prior to the 17th Amendment, it was the state legislature which would select our U.S. senators. So the congressmen, the House reps, would answer to the people, the senators would answer to the state. Now, very interestingly, let's say the people, like we talked about in Lecture 1, recognize, hey, we can vote ourselves money from the public treasury. We want more money. They tell their congressman, please propose a bill that gives us more benefits from the public treasury. They propose that bill. It goes over to the Senate. The Senate answers to the states. And prior to the 16th Amendment, the federal government couldn't tax the people directly. They typically did their taxing to the state, and the state would tax the people. If they wanted to raise more money, the state legislature would say, I don't know, let's check. Should we increase taxes? They say to their people. And the people say, no more taxes. And so the state legislators say to their senators, don't pass this bill, because if we raise the taxes to help you fund it, the people will be upset with us. You see how this works? It makes a nice little circle that checks against the government growing too much. The people in the end have to pay for it anyway. This way, we have our state legislatures that we're directly in contact with, they're closest to the people, saying, we don't want you to raise our taxes. Then they kill the bill. That was a nice structure, kept federal government in check. In particular, applying this to war. If the people feel there's a significant enough threat that we need to go to war, yes, we're willing to put our lives on the line for this war declaration, and the House declares war. The Senate then, speaking to their state legislature, does the legislature feel that there's enough threat they're willing to raise taxes to fund the war? And if the state legislature supports the Senate then declares war. Only then do we get a declaration of war. Do you see how that would be more rare than the way we're doing it today with just the president saying we're going to war now? And then we're going to fund it without anyone noticing? Here's the way it works now. Now that we've passed the 16th and 17th Amendments, the federal government can tax the people directly. The people are electing both our U.S. House and U.S. Senate directly. And the taxes do come directly from us, and the state legislature is totally left out of the picture, aren't they? Now, the federal government asking the people, can we increase taxes to pay for this war? And the people say, no, we don't want any more taxes. What do they do now? They say, if we can't raise taxes, but we still want to spend the money, we just created a new thing called this Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve can just print the money, which in effect, as we covered in Lecture 3, still does take the money from the people, but in a manner that, as the quote went, not one man in a million can diagnose. You don't see this tax as a hidden tax, but they're still taking our money. It's just a more quiet way of taxing the people. And it's much easier to get bills through because you don't see the resistance from the people. It's much easier to go to war. I firmly believe that today, if each one of us were sent a bill on a monthly basis for our share of our war efforts, that there would be a large outcry against the war, where there isn't right now because we don't directly see that cost. So it's a good way of hiding the expense from the people so they can do it anyway. So now that's the grand big picture here. We have many different checks against going to unnecessary war put into the Constitution. The army is temporary. The militia can be called forth, but only for defensive purposes. And only when Congress declares war, both the House and the Senate, do you then feel comfortable that we have a nation united in the war effort. When our nation's united in the war effort, we never lose. We've only declared war 5 times in our history. I told you it'd be rare. Only 5 times. The War of 1812, Mexican-American War, Spanish-American War, and World War I and World War II. How do we do in those wars, by the way? We won. We won all of them, soundly. How have we done in the wars we've been involved in since then that we didn't declare? Not so well. I think there's a concept here that we're missing, that maybe if we actually go through the constitutional method of declaring war, there's some power behind it. There is. That we always win, and we win definitively, and it's a short order. You don't have these long, drawn-out wars that never seem to resolve. So with that great wisdom, I want to go to some additional great quotes. This man by the name of Hermann Göring, was one of Adolf Hitler's top men. And during the Nazi war trials, the Nuremberg war trials they called it, he made a very interesting observation. He said, of course the people don't want war. Why would some poor slob on a farm want to risk his life in a war when the best he can get out of it is to come back to his farm in one piece? Naturally, the common people don't want war, neither in Russia, nor in England, nor in America, nor in Germany for that matter. That is understood. But after all, it is the leaders of a country who determine the policy, and it's always a simple matter to drag the people along, whether it's a democracy, or a fascist dictatorship, or a parliament, or a communist dictatorship. You can always lead the people into war. Now, the person interviewing him from America, Dr. Gustav Gilbert here, replies to him, there is one difference. In a democracy, the people have some say in the matter through their elected representatives, and in the United States, only Congress can declare wars. Well, he's exactly right. Unfortunately, we've abandoned that principle. But Mr. Göring counters him and says, oh, that's all well and good, but voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to do the bidding of their leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked, and then denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism and exposing the country to danger. It works the same in any country. I'm afraid that as I began learning these principles, that sounded all too familiar to me. This idea of telling us we're being attacked and then denouncing the pacifists for lack of patriotism. Don't you support the troops? Well, sure, but that doesn't mean I support their misuse. Now, a little more recently, General Douglas MacArthur pointed to this very same thing happening in our day. He says, our government has kept us in a perpetual state of fear, kept us in a continuous stampede of patriotic fervor, with the cry of grave national emergency. Always there has been some terrible evil at home or some monstrous foreign power that was going to gobble us up if we did not blindly rally behind it. See, the power of war is a great way to control your own people, as well as conquering other nations. There's a great amount of liberties that are lost for the cause of war. Norman Vincent Peale summed it up rather succinctly here. He says, Americans used to roar like lions for liberty. Now we bleat like sheep for security. Very much some of the concerns that I pointed out from our founding fathers, that for the sake of security, we'd be willing to sacrifice our essential liberties. George Washington gave us a great warning on our foreign policy here. He says, the great rule of conduct for us in regard to foreign nations is in extending to our commercial relations to have with them as little political connection as possible. What's he advocating? We should have commercial relations with foreign nations, but to be tied to them as little as possible. We shouldn't have foreign treaties and arrangements and things like that, just free trade. A very simple foreign policy. John Quincy Adams gave us another warning. America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to the freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. Our military is to be used to protect us. That's their purpose. That's what we fund them for, and that's what our lives are for. Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, also said it quite succinctly, where he says, what would be wrong with simply minding our own business? I like that logic. So, this was the traditional conservative viewpoint when it came to foreign relations and foreign wars. And it continued all the way through the 1940s and 50s, and we began to see a shift as we got into the 60s and 70s. We have, for example, Senator Robert Taft, who was known as Mr. Republican and was very much a non-interventionist when it came to foreign policy, to not interfere with the affairs of other nations. but to freely trade with them. Now, as we come today to modern conservatives, we see a very different brand of conservative. George Bush, for example, here, George W., during his presidency, he signed, toward the end of his presidency, this economic bailout, this stimulus package, and a TARP bill, this trouble relief program to bail out the banks that were too big to fail. Very clearly Keynesian socialist economics, some of the topics that we covered in Lecture 3. That is not the economic theory of a free market system, nor the traditional economic theory of a conservative. He also declared in his defense, I had to abandon free market principles in order to save the free market. It doesn't sound like he believes that free markets would work. Now, I should also point out that he wasn't trying to save the free market because we weren't working under a free market at the time. The problems that we had were caused by government intervention, and were supposed to be solved by, of course, more government intervention. Next, he expanded the Medicaid prescription drug program, which is clearly socialist welfare spending, and sent American troops to war without having Congress first declare war, circumventing the Constitution. And incidentally, in this process of going abroad to war, what was their purpose? We're spreading democracy. I think we covered pretty well in Lecture 1 the dangers of spreading democracy. It always leads to a socialist state. Is this what a conservative is? I'll tell you, this was about the time when I was beginning to understand that my political viewpoints were in conflict with principles of liberty in the Constitution. I voted for George Bush. And now I'm feeling like maybe I made a mistake. This is not a conservative constitutional viewpoint that he's putting forward. What is going on with a conservative? If he's a conservative, what am I? Because I'm clearly not that. And the problem is he's not a conservative. We're mislabeling him. He's not a liberal, but he's not a conservative. What is he? Well, there's a term that's called neoconservative. When I first heard this, I thought it was just a slur, a slander against certain political viewpoints. It's not. The neoconservative name is actually one that neoconservatives have given to themselves. And over the next few slides, I'll demonstrate to you exactly what they define themselves as. But when you consider George Bush to be a neoconservative, then all these policies fit perfectly with the definition of a neoconservative. So let's see what that is. First of all, their origins. Back in 1972, Irving Kristol, who declares himself to be the godfather, kind of the founding father of the neoconservative movement, Irving Kristol points to their history saying in 1972, the nomination of George McGovern signified that the Democratic Party was not hospitable to any degree of neoconservatism. Only a few of us drew the obvious conclusion that we would have to try to find a home in the Republican Party. But with every passing year, our numbers grew. More and more people migrated from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party because they rejected the George McGovern version of Democratic Party, which was an open embracing of the hippie movement and things of that nature. And so very much we saw a migration from the Democrat Party and an infiltration of the Republican Party, steering the Republican Party in a new direction, that of neoconservative. And again, what is a neoconservative? Irving Kristol wrote a fairly definitive book on the topic called Neoconservatism. In there he tells us, for example, we, the neoconservatives, accepted the New Deal in principle and had little affection for the kind of isolationism that then permeated American conservatism. We'll spend a moment on each of those 2 points, the New Deal and isolationism. First of all, what was the New Deal? Of course, we all know under FDR, he implemented the New Deal, this massive socialist welfare program, really. Created massive government expansion of departments, bureaus, agencies, and deepened the Great Depression of the 1930s. By any free market economist's assessment, it caused the 1930s to be this Great Depression rather than a little blip. In fact, it's an interesting comparison to compare the Great Depression of 1920s, which never happened, but had bigger causes that should have caused a Great Depression than the 1930s did. And by lack of government intervention in the 1920s, we never had that depression. Whereas the 1930s, the government intervention caused it to be much worse than it otherwise would have been. Now, the other part I want to go into is isolationism. He was referring to this isolationism that permeated the Republican Party prior to them invading it. Isolationism is having no dealings with foreign nations at all. You shut down your borders, you don't trade with them, you don't go to war, you don't do anything, you just defend yourself and you're isolated. Now, he was saying that the viewpoints in the Republican Party at that time was isolationist. Clearly not the case. They truly wanted open and free trade with foreign nations. So he was mislabeling it, trying to slander their viewpoints. But truly what the traditional Republican viewpoint was that of non-interventionism, which is very different from isolationism. It is simply staying out of the affairs and wars of other nations while openly trading with them. Now, this concept of war, concept of a just war, I want to go into just briefly. You remember John Adams, great is the guilt of an unnecessary war. The only war that's really necessary is when you're trying to defend yourself in one manner or another, which sometimes might need to be going abroad in defense to finally cut off a problem that's continuing to invade you. But nonetheless, it always must be defensive. It must be formally declared by the proper authority, which in our country is Congress declaring war constitutionally. It must have a just cause. It must be for good reasons and have a good intention of why we're going to war. It must be the last resort. John Adams' presidency, one of his greatest legacies was his avoiding of war with France. How very carefully he walked the line between the two opposing political parties, one wanting him to go to war against France and the other saying, you're not doing enough to appease them. And he walked the line very carefully between those two to avoid war. It must have limited and unchanging objectives. You don't go into war for one purpose and, hey, while we're here, let's do this and this too. That clearly violates number 3, among other things, just cause and right intention. It must be proportionate means. It means that you're not just going in to level the entire country of every living thing, but only those that are military combatants, which goes right into number 7, that non-combatants would have immunity. We don't try for civilian casualties. That would be just war. That was the traditional vision that our founding fathers had when we did need to go to war. These were the general considerations that they held. Now, contrary to that, today we have a new concept, that of preemptive war. The type of war that is not defensive, it's an act of aggression. It's a type of war that started without being attacked and without any certain expectation of being attacked. Just that they might be a threat to us, so we better go in there and conquer them before they become such. Clearly the opposite of just war. Now, going back to Irving Kristol again, he gives us a little more insight here. He says the conservative welfare state is perfectly consistent with the neoconservative perspective. What's a conservative welfare state? That seems to me to be a contradiction of terms. But again, perfectly consistent. So that gives us one of the keys to what a neoconservative is. They definitely support a welfare state, like the New Deal. And interventionist foreign policy. They don't believe in this isolationism, as he labeled it, including spreading democracy. Those are 2 key points of what a neoconservative stands for then. Socialist welfare programs at home and foreign interventionism and spreading democracy. The third point that I want to make was the most surprising to me. He says, I regard myself lucky to have been a young Trotskyite and have not one single bitter memory. He's a Trotskyite? Y'all know who Trotsky was, right? We'll go into that in just a moment. Speaking of the rise of neoconservatism, the other important influence on neoconservatives was the legacy of Trotsky. In the framework of international communism, the Trotskyites were rabid internationalists rather than realists or nationalists. Now, on this note for just a moment, y'all remember what Nazi stands for? It's for National Socialism, right? Nazis aren't the political opposite of a socialist or a communist. They're very similar in many ways. It's another form of big government. But they were National Socialists, where Trotskyites were international communists. And yet they openly point to Trotsky's international communist viewpoint as an important influence on the philosophy of neoconservatism. So Leon Trotsky, let's go into who he was. Leon Trotsky, first of all, in 1917, he had partnered with Lenin, led to the Bolshevik Revolution, which overthrew Russia and created communist Russia. So clearly he is a Marxist, a communist, and as we probably well know with Russian history, that led to a very dark time in their history, murder of many of their own people. thousands and thousands and thousands of their own people. Very brutal, brutal regime. But then Stalin comes along, even worse, murders millions of his own people. Leon Trotsky partnered with Stalin for a short time, and they discovered they had irreconcilable differences. Enough so that Stalin issued an extermination order on Trotsky. Trotsky had to flee the country for his life. Now, exiled by Stalin, eventually Stalin's people did catch up with Trotsky in Mexico, and he was murdered. But Trotsky, throughout his entire life, never ceased working for total government. He always was a totalitarian Marxist, just of a different style than Stalin. In particular, and with the separation between Trotsky and Stalin, it divided Marxism into two camps. So those that look to Karl Marx today typically identify with either Stalin or Trotsky as what version of Marxism they adhere to. There's a division now. Okay, so here's our three main points: socialist welfare programs, interventionist foreign policy, including wars, spreading democracy, that word internationalist was used, and Trotsky-style Marxism defines a neoconservative. I find that astounding. Now here's a few prominent names you might recognize that helped Irving Kristol with this takeover of the Republican Party. One, William F. Buckley Jr., founder of the National Review magazine, and then also Robert Bartley, editor of the Wall Street Journal. Let's go into each of them for just a moment. First of all, William F. Buckley Jr. This book here, written by John McManus, president of the John Birch Society a number of years ago, goes into the history of William F. Buckley and his role in helping create the neoconservative movement. This book, Pied Piper for the Establishment, is an excellent understanding of both the history of neoconservatism as well as his role in it. Now in here, he quotes William F. Buckley Jr., declaring, "We have got to accept big government for the duration, the instrument of a totalitarian bureaucracy within our shores, and the attendant centralization of power in Washington." Now again, does that sound conservative to you? Not very. That's very fitting with the neoconservative, though. But notice the year. 2 decades before they finally founded the neoconservative movement, William F. Buckley was already a neoconservative. Now, Joseph Sobran, who worked for 21 years with William F. Buckley at National Review, finally was, as he became more and more aware of some of what was going on there at National Review, he was, as it says here, unceremoniously dismissed. He was kicked out. Now, I've enjoyed Joseph Sobran's articles through the years. Unfortunately, he passed away a couple years ago. But he has always been a very solid conservative, not neoconservative. And much of the National Review has always been truly conservative, not neoconservative. But it was because of that fact that it positioned William F. Buckley to have the ear of true conservatives and to gradually lead them into this new conservative. That's what neoconservative means, is the new conservative, as he redefined it. Joseph Sobran, upon reading this book, William F. Buckley Jr., Pied Piper for the Establishment, he says, "John McManus has gathered together a mountain of damning but firmly documented data about William F. Buckley Jr. American conservatism's longtime intellectual leader has been a calamity for conservatism." As John McManus met with Joseph Sobran, saw he had a copy of the book, wanted him to sign it. He says, "Oh, have you read the book?" He says, I read it twice. And he starts showing him the dog-eared pages and written in margins. He'd gone through the entire book and said to him, "If only I had known this when I was working for him." The other media personality we mentioned earlier that helped with the takeover of the Republican Party was Robert Bartley of the Wall Street Journal. And this statement, I think, pretty clearly defines his political viewpoints here. He says, "Mexican President Vicente Fox suggests that NAFTA should evolve into something like the European Union with open borders. He can rest assured that there is one voice north of the Rio Grande that supports his vision, to wit, this newspaper," meaning himself. Very clearly an open borders advocate. We need to create a globalist union here. Now, the neoconservatives started an organization known as Project for the New American Century back in 1997. And find it very interesting, some of the things that they openly declared were their objectives. First of all, they called for the United States to use our military power to meet global responsibilities. We could summarize that as policing the world. The next one was to strengthen its ties with its allies, very opposite of what George Washington was suggesting we should do, having as little to do with them as possible. So unnecessary entangling alliances. We should challenge regimes that are hostile to our values. Preemptive wars. And then we should also insist on political and economic freedom abroad. But the form of freedom that's supposed to be is through spreading democracy, not a true constitutional republic. And then they called for the creation of an international order. That is clearly world government globalism. These are the things that the Project for the New American Century stood for. Now, shockingly, the next one was even more surprising to me, and that is that in the year 2000, September of 2000, they declared a need for another Pearl Harbor type event that would galvanize the American people to support their ambitious plans to ensure political and economic domination of the world. In particular, they had plans for restructuring the Middle East. In the year 2000, we need a new Pearl Harbor. And coincidentally, they got their wish almost exactly 1 year later, September of 2001. Who were the signatories? Here are some of the people that signed on to the Project for New American Century. You might recognize especially the top three: Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Paul Wolfowitz. Other names you might recognize as well. I want to focus on the top three because we'll follow them now and what they did next. First of all, the Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz trio wanted Bush 1 to reinvade Iraq in '92 and to finish the job, to completely get rid of its leader and spread democracy. Unfortunately, Bush was not reelected in '93, so the three formed the Project for New American Century and began petitioning Clinton to do the same thing, to invade Iraq, to topple its leader, and to create democracy. Unfortunately, Clinton was a little too busy with his personal matters. We won't go into that. And Gingrich really didn't ever sign on to this plan either. So along comes Cheney, Wolfowitz, and Rumsfeld, given top posts in with the second Bush presidency, and they were all in positions of foreign policy. They immediately resumed urging another invasion of Iraq prior to 9/11, and finally, with the event of 9/11, they had their crisis for the people to, their Pearl Harbor event, we could say, for the people to back them in this move. As Rahm Emanuel says, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. They certainly put it to good use for their objectives, didn't they? Now, George W. Bush, in his presidency, as we mentioned, he selected the three, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, as topmost assistants. He obtained authorization to invade Iraq from U.S. Congress? No? Oh yes, from the United Nations. That's a little bit contrary to what the Constitution says and what we covered earlier today. Next, forcing democracy on other nations and more socialism and steady escalating indebtedness for our nation. That sums up his efforts under their guidance and direction. Now, interestingly, of these three, Donald Rumsfeld, as we have on their feature article here called Neocon Control, was awarded the Defender of the Constitution Award at CPAC back in 2011. I find that a little ironic considering he was one of the most avid in violating the Constitution. And because of the ignorance of many of those at CPAC, he was the defender of the Constitution. I don't mean to speak ill of those that voted for him in this regard, but it just shows that we're ignorant of the Constitution. Even within the conservative side of things here, we're very ignorant of the Constitution and don't recognize those within our ranks that are not one of us, that are working against the principles of liberty. And I was as guilty as anyone. I was a neocon without knowing it. I supported this big government programs, especially the war powers and things of that nature. Next, Mark Gerson. The neoconservatives have so changed conservatism that what we now identify as conservatism is largely what was once neoconservatism. And in so doing, they have defined the way vast numbers of Americans view their economy, their polity, and their society. And I must say that did describe me as well before I began understanding what we're covering today. Samuel Francis, he also points out the whole concept of conservatism in America is virtually devoid of meaning, in large part because conservatives have made the seminal error of allowing dilettantes like Mr. Buckley to define it for them in the first place. We've allowed him to redefine what a conservative is. Now, prominent neoconservatives that are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations, you might recognize a few of these faces or names. In particular, Dick Cheney, prominent neoconservative Council on Foreign Relations member. Charles Krauthammer is one I've seen on Fox News a lot lately. He is a common commentator, I guess you could say. Newt Gingrich, wasn't he running for political office somehow recently? Oh yeah, president. And John McCain in the last round running for president as well. Who's Rupert Murdoch? Well, here's your little clue. You have the little logo in the background here, Fox News. He's the owner of the Fox News media empire. And it's Council on Foreign Relations neoconservative. Now, just to make things a little more confusing, I thought that Obama was clearly the liberal in the race. But because Obama has turned on his own statements about war in order to promote the Libyan incursion, Obama is now a born-again neocon, says William Kristol, son of Irving Kristol, the founder of neoconservatism. William Kristol is also a very prominent neoconservative. He's kind of gloating that, hey, look, Obama's joined our ranks, spreading the war front. So, just to make things a little more confusing, it seems that the two parties are almost identical, doesn't it? Carol Quigley pointed to this as one of their objectives, that the two parties should be almost identical, so that the American people can throw the rascals out at any election without leading to any profound or extensive shifts in policy.
All right. Well, we are at the top of the hour here, and Chris, there's only about 3 minutes left of that video, and a lot of it is just him saying goodbye to everybody. So I think we got the main gist out to the folks.
I have to agree. That was a really good video. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And Thumper, thank you for airing part 4 of that series for us.
If we keep at it, we'll get all 6 of them done.
I'm sure we will. I'm going to foreclose our closer, and I'm going to turn it right over. I want to thank everybody out there for watching. I hope that video inspired and made you think. And Dumper, I hope you can drop the link for everybody again so they can check it out. That series is awesome. And I'm going to be keeping an eye on that too. I want to see the next 2 that you get ready some time to play. So with that, everybody, thank you so much. And again, love you all. Without you, we would not have a show. We drop links in there. Go to our YouTube page, subscribe and follow. All of the episodes have been transferred over there as well under the playlist. You can check them out. Some of these episodes will be uploaded. And go to our Twitter and follow, like of all our pages. We love you. I'm going to turn it over to Dan with Connecting the Dots, sir. Thank you again, everybody. Love you. Dan, you have a great show, sir.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'll tell you what, I'm going to have to call my good friend, Robert Brown, and see if we can get him to come on live. Maybe we can do a program together.
I would enjoy that. Yes. So that would be great. You let me know.
Yeah, I definitely will. Okay, Chris.
All right. You have a good show and just jump right in. Love you, everybody.
You.
Bye.
Happy New Year. Thank you.
Same to you.
All righty. We have a great show today. We are going to have a very, very special guest, a very special friend, and that is Dr. Alan Keyes. And we're going to be talking about what has been happening in the United States with this really, really questionable election. And Dr. Keyes is a strong advocate of let's talk about maybe redoing this, and let's talk about joining the president in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And so I think this is going to be a dynamite program. Dr. Keys, I'm sure that our listeners are all familiar with him, but he's been a UN representative for the United States. He's been involved in foreign affairs. He has been involved as a candidate for president 3 different times. He has been involved in the United States in a way that very, very few people have the opportunity. And I have to say, Dr. Keys, you are an absolute, probably I would call it a national treasure because of your aptitude, your abilities, and the fact that you are such an incredibly fantastic patriot. I welcome you to the program. I look forward to 2 hours with a good friend.
Hello?
Yes, we're here.
Hi, good to be with you. Thank you, and thank you for the kind words.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's incredible every time I get a chance to be on air with you. And all I can say is that it's a real privilege to know someone who has not only such a outstanding regard for our national honor, our national message, someone who is a historical scholar of your magnitude, and the fact that you are such an outspoken advocate